The settler bride was left for dead in the desert by her in-laws, but a brave Comanche warrior saved her life. Somewhere between the dry bones of a rattlesnake and the forgotten tracks of a wagon, she lay, face to the sun, lips cracked open like split leather, bridal lace dragging behind her like the ghost of a vow. The desert did not care for ceremony. No hymns, no prayers, just heat and silence and the slow, patient circling of buzzards. Her name was Hallie once. The wind tore at the edges of that name, pulling it into the dust. In another life, someone might have spoken it gently, wrapped it in laughter. Now it clung to her ribs like a forgotten hymn, unsung and unwelcome. Her hands were scraped raw. Sand clung to her eyelashes. The white of her wedding dress had long surrendered to the ochre of the wasteland. It wasn't the kind of white meant for promises anymore. It was the kind the earth spit out when it was done with a thing. She hadn't screamed when they left her. That would have pleased them too much. Instead, Hallie had watched the wagon shrink into the horizon, her own husband never glancing back, his mother's tight-lipped satisfaction unmoved by the finality of it. She remembered the way her boots had been taken from her, how her water flask had been passed between the brothers like a joke, how the eldest had said with a grin, "She wanted a fresh start, didn't she?" They'd left her with nothing but a torn hem and a story no one would believe. Hallie had walked, or tried to. The first steps were rage. The second, confusion. After the 10th, it was only survival. By the time she collapsed beneath the jut of a sun-bleached rock, she no longer cared if the earth opened up and swallowed her whole. But the earth didn't. It never does, not for women like her. Time lost meaning. Shadows grew long. The sun curled into the hills. She didn't sleep. She drifted in and out of memory. Her mother's laugh. Her father's boots on the porch. The way her husband used to touch her elbow in public, light, possessive, like he was checking the weight of something he didn't quite want to carry. In the end, it wasn't heartbreak that undid her. It was the quiet, that brutal, wide silence of the desert that didn't echo. Her voice felt too small to belong in it. She had tried once to call out, her voice nothing more than a dry whisper. "Hallie," she'd said. "I am Hallie." But the wind took it. She was half buried in sand when she opened her eyes again. A lizard sat near her cheek, still as stone. The buzzards hadn't come any closer, yet. Her dress clung to her legs, heavy with grit. Somewhere in the blur of dying light, she tried to remember the prayer her mother had taught her for crossing the prairie. "Let the land know your name," her mother had said once. "Say it clear, loud, so the wind don't forget you." Hallie reached out a trembling hand and began to trace letters into the dirt. C. L. Her fingers stopped. She stared at the half-formed line, then let her arm drop. What good was a name if no one said it with love? She must have slept, or fainted. The world folded in around her like fabric. The air cooled. The stars blinked into being above her like pale watchers. Dreams came, not soft ones, but strange, feral things full of fire and hoofbeats and eyes that didn't blink. And then a sound. She didn't move, couldn't, just listened. A low, rhythmic padding. No wheels. No clanking harness. Not a wagon. A horse. Hooves muffled by sand, careful, slow. Then silence. Even the air seemed to wait. A shadow passed across her skin. Large. Upright. She forced her eyes open. The stars spun. A dark shape stood nearby. Man or ghost, she couldn't tell. He didn't speak. He didn't touch her. Just stood, like he was considering the shape of her suffering. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Not even her name. He moved then. Not toward her, but to the side. Sat cross-legged in the sand, not close, not far. In the firelight, when Hetty built a fire, she saw a face carved from calm. Skin the color of dusk. Hair braided and tied with leather. The fire painted soft orange along his cheekbone. She blinked, still not sure if he was real. Her breath was ragged, shallow. He offered her water, not with insistence. He simply placed a carved gourd near her hand and turned away. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. The water was cool. Not sweet, but clean. She drank too fast and coughed, but he didn't react. The silence between them was not hostile. It was reverent. He didn't ask her name. In the morning, she tried to sit. Pain lanced through her legs. Her feet were blistered, bleeding. The bones of her soles burned with each movement. She bit back a cry. He brought strips of cloth. "Motion gently, may I?" She hesitated, then nodded. He didn't speak English. Or maybe he simply chose silence. His hands were steady, practiced. He wrapped her feet like she was something sacred, not ruined. She watched him, her throat tight. No man had ever touched her without wanting something in return. Her eyes burned. She turned away before the tears could fall. They rested beneath a mesquite tree. He cooked without words, small movements, focused, unhurried. The meat was tough but warm. Hallie chewed slowly. The taste anchored her. She noticed things. How he watched the sky before eating. How he pressed one hand to the earth when he stood. There was a rhythm to him, a stillness that spoke louder than speech. He pointed to his chest once, tapped it lightly. Then to the wind. She didn't understand. Not at first. Then he repeated the motion. Chest. Wind. A pause. Again. A name. She tried to mimic the sound. It came out wrong. He gave a slight shake of his head, but not unkind. "Toki H," she whispered on the third try. A nod. The smallest smile touched his lips. He rose after, went to his horse. Tied something to the saddle. Her soiled dress. When she looked confused, he met her gaze and lifted his hand, drawing an invisible line across the sky. West. He would not leave her here. She stared at him, the weight of what he offered sinking in. He could have ridden past, could have taken her water and left. But he stayed. Trust was a strange ache. She hadn't felt it in so long it almost hurt. She tried to stand. He stepped close, arm out. She braced herself against him, staggered upright. Her breath caught, half from pain, half from something else. She'd never been held like this. Not even on her wedding night. He helped her onto the horse. She expected roughness. He was careful instead, slow, mindful of her wounds. They rode. The wind was cooler now. The sky smeared in pale peach and lavender. She leaned forward slightly, feeling the horse's rhythm beneath her. Her body ached, but something in her had begun to uncoil. She did not speak. Neither did he. They traveled until the sun hung low. Then he stopped near a creek. Set camp again. No questions. No probing. Just presence. She watched him from the fire's edge, the way he moved through the world like he belonged to it. No noise. No need to fill the silence. When sleep came, she curled beneath a borrowed blanket and listened to the night breathe. Her thoughts circled. Why had he helped her? Who was he really? And most of all, what did it mean to be saved by someone who asked nothing in return? She didn't know yet. But as she drifted into sleep, one truth wrapped itself around her bones like warmth. The desert hadn't taken her. Not all of her. Not yet. The wind did not speak, but he listened to it just the same. Tokeh had learned to read its language before he could shape full words of his own. It whispered warnings and carried secrets, danced along the ridges of the land like a restless spirit. That morning, it had guided him towards something strange, an interruption in the desert's rhythm. A woman left for dead in bridal white, skin burned, heart barely beating. He hadn't expected her to live, but she did. She woke with a flinch, breath catching in her throat like a trapped bird. Her eyes darted to him, wild, uncertain, rimmed with the red of sun and salt. She tried to sit, but her body betrayed her. He didn't move to help. Not yet. A frightened creature needed space before kindness. He'd learned that from injured horses and from himself. She looked around at the creek, the small fire, the horse grazing nearby. Her hands twitched at her sides, as if searching for something familiar. But there was nothing left to reach for. Her world had been stripped down to bone and sky. He crouched near her, slow and deliberate. From a leather pouch, he pulled dried meat and a few wild berries. Set them down between them. Not too close. She didn't touch the food. Not at first. Her gaze lingered on his face, not in suspicion, but study, trying to understand him, trying to decide if she was safe. Tokeh remained still. He was used to being watched. His tribe had called him Wind Watcher for a reason. He noticed what others missed, the twitch of a hawk's wing before the dive, the bend of grass before storm. The woman moved finally, reached for the food with stiff fingers, lifted a berry to her lips. Her mouth trembled, not from hunger, but hesitation. Then she ate, slow, careful. Her body remembered how to survive even when her spirit had nearly surrendered. He nodded once, barely perceptible. She noticed. They did not speak. She didn't know his words. He didn't offer hers. The fire crackled gently. Tokeh watched her, but not like a man watches a woman. Not yet. His gaze held no hunger, only a steady awareness, like a mountain noticing the weather shift. He saw the way she winced as she moved, the shape of the blisters beneath her new wrappings, the way her hands shook when she tried to stand. She was still wounded, but not weak. The horse snorted nearby. She flinched. Tokeh rose, moved the animal, ran his hand along its neck. The mare stilled under his touch. He looked back. The woman's eyes softened just a little. She saw something in the motion, gentleness perhaps, or control. He returned and knelt again, took a strip of leather, and began carving into it with his knife. He didn't look up. The act was ritual, quiet. The sound of blade on hide filled the silence between them. When he was done, he handed it to her. A simple braid, nothing fancy, but woven with patience. She took it slowly, uncertain, touched the edges. Her thumb brushed over the center, where his knife had cut a small, deliberate curve. She looked up. "What is it?" He pointed to the wind, then to his chest. She frowned, then tried. "Tokeh?" A faint nod. Approval flickered in his eyes. She tapped her own chest. "Ali." Her voice cracked on the word, but it held. She didn't know why she said it then. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, like her name wasn't something broken, but something returned. He looked at her without judgment, not as someone to be pitied or studied, just seen. She wept that night in silence. Not loud sobs, not the wild grief she'd carried when the wagon vanished over the rise. These tears were smaller, slower, like a stream finding its way through dry earth. Tokeh didn't look away. In the days that followed, they traveled in fragments. He taught her how to pat her feet with woven grass, how to drink from a creek without taking the mud, how to read the sky for shade before the heat turned cruel. She watched him with quiet awe. He moved like someone born from the land. Every step had intention. Every pause was a choice. He never touched her without asking through motion first, a gesture, a glance. She found herself waiting for those silent questions. She found herself answering them. They camped beneath a cluster of cottonwoods one evening. He lit a fire with flint and dry brush. She gathered what small wood she could manage. Her hands were still raw, but less so now. Her limbs steadier. He handed her a gourd. Inside was a paste of herbs. She recoiled at the smell, sharp, earthy, strange. He mimed applying it to her burns, then held out a cloth. Hallie hesitated, then pulled back her sleeve. The skin there was angry red, cracked. She'd stopped feeling the pain days ago, which somehow made it worse. He worked in silence, dabbing the paste gently, never lingering. His touch was precise, like mending something valuable. Not once did his fingers stray. Not once did his eyes wander from the wound. She said softly, "You're not like the men I've known." He tilted his head, not understanding the words. But something in her tone made him pause. Hallie smiled just faintly. Good. That night, she dreamed of firelight and feathers, of a voice she couldn't place saying, "He watches the wind, because the wind watches all things." When she woke, he was already up, crouched by the creek, watching the water like it might reveal a secret. She joined him, sat near, not quite touching. The silence between them no longer felt like distance. It was comfort now, a space where nothing was demanded. "Do you have people?" she asked. He didn't answer. Or perhaps he didn't understand. She tried again, miming a group with her hands, then placing her palm on her chest. His gaze darkened for a moment, just a flicker. Then he looked away. Hallie didn't press. She understood the weight of silence better than most. They moved on. The landscape shifted slowly, more rock, less sand. Cacti bloomed in cautious color. Birds followed them at a distance. She began to hum sometimes, under her breath, when the sun wasn't too cruel. One afternoon, a storm threatened. The clouds rolled in low and gray. Tokeh led her to a shallow cave. The wind howled through the canyons, rattling mesquite branches. Rain began to fall in sheets, hard and fast. Inside they were close, closer than ever before. She shivered, not from cold, but memory. He handed her his blanket. She refused it with a shake of her head. He didn't insist, just placed it beside her and sat back. The firelight flickered. Shadows danced on stone. She watched him. "You should have left me," she said. "Back there." His eyes lifted to hers. "You didn't even know me." A long pause. Then he pointed to the wind again. "Wind," she guessed. He nodded, then drew a slow arc in the air between them, as if to say, "It brought you here." Hallie didn't respond, but her chest ached in a way that felt less like hurt and more like recognition. She leaned back against the wall of the cave, eyes closing. Her voice was soft. "My mother used to say the land listens better than people do." Tokeh didn't move, but she felt his attention. She said, "If you cry into the earth, the seeds understand." The fire crackled. The rain fell. She let the silence stretch, unafraid of it now. "I think I understand that." They stayed in the cave until morning. When the rain stopped, the world smelled clean again. New. Tokeh helped her mount the horse without a word. They rode west. Not away from something anymore. Toward. At dusk, they came upon a ridge. From its crest, the land stretched golden and vast. Trees in the distance. Smoke from a small fire, maybe a camp or an outpost. Hallie squinted. She could almost make out buildings. A faint bell in the air. A town. Her breath caught. Tokeh looked at her. She stared at the horizon, her past waiting somewhere in the dust. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. He dismounted. Waited. She stayed on the horse, caught between the rise and the reckoning. She looked down at him, his calm, his strength, the quiet way he stood. Then she reached her hand toward him. He took it. They would go together. Not for justice. Not yet. But because something unspoken had begun to root between them. And neither the wind nor the past could uproot it. Not anymore. The town appeared like a memory made solid. Low rooftops softened by distance. Fences threading through wind-blown grass. Smoke curling from chimneys like sleepy breath. Hallie sat astride the horse in silence, the muscles of her back tense beneath her patched dress. The air smelled of ash and iron, and something else, something sweeter, half familiar. She couldn't place it. Tokeh stood beside her, eyes trained not on the town, but on her. The horizon mattered less than her heartbeat. She didn't move. Not yet. Her mind ran ahead, faster than her feet ever could, spinning futures, fumbling with questions that had no ready answers. What did one say to the place that tried to bury her? How did one walk through doors that had been nailed shut behind their back? A breeze tugged at the ends of her hair. She looked down at her hands, now calloused and firm. There was strength in them, quiet and hard-earned. The woman who'd been left to die was no longer the woman sitting in this saddle. "I have to see it," she whispered. Tokeh nodded once. They descended the ridge, the hooves of the mare thudding soft against the trail. Hallie sat straighter with every yard. Her bones ached, but her spine was steady. She gripped the reins with fingers that had once clutched a locket in despair. The outskirts greeted them with wary silence. A boy with a sling of kindling paused in his step, eyes wide. A pair of old men on a porch leaned back, chewing slowly. Hallie saw recognition blink behind their gazes, then confusion, then disbelief. She dismounted outside the general store. Her boots touched dirt like roots finding old soil. The street hadn't changed. The same creaky sign above the sheriff's office. The same crooked hitching posts. And just down the way, his house. Her husband's. Tokeh remained near, but still, watching the windows, the shadows that moved behind curtains. Hallie walked forward alone, the hem of her dress brushing against her ankles. Her heart knocked softly in her chest, not from fear, but from memory. Each step peeled back another layer of who she had been. The obedient wife, the invisible woman, the burden to be unburdened. She reached the front of the small church before she paused. The doors were open. A woman swept the steps, young, pink-cheeked, the kind who'd never had to earn kindness. She glanced up and froze. Hallie met her eyes, saw the flicker of recognition there too. "I heard you were dead," the woman said, voice faint with awe. Hallie didn't answer. She walked past. Her husband's home sat under a leaning pine tree. Smoke curled from the chimney. She saw a figure in the window, him, silhouette sharp, moving with the kind of confidence only ignorance affords. She raised her hand to knock, then didn't. Instead, she turned away. Her truth wasn't meant for him. Not anymore. She walked back into the center of town and stopped before the water trough. A crowd had begun to gather. Whispers, like insects, filled the air. Her name passed between mouths, reshaped by rumor and astonishment. Then the sheriff stepped forward. "Mrs. Redden?" he asked, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. Hallie raised her chin. Not anymore. The sheriff looked behind her at Toki H., who remained by the horse, his stillness sharper than any blade. "You best explain yourself," the sheriff said. "Folks been thinking the worst." "They were right," Hallie replied. "But not about me." She reached into the small pouch tied at her hip. From it, she pulled her wedding ring, held it up. "I was left to die," she said, voice calm. "By my husband, his brothers, his mother. They stripped me of food, water, hope." A murmur passed through the crowd. "He said I ran off, that I was sick, that I couldn't handle the land." She paused, let the silence swell. "But I handled it. I walked through it, and I survived." She set the ring on the edge of the trough. It made no sound, but the act landed heavy. A child's voice piped up. "Is it true?" Hallie turned, softening. "Yes, but I'm not here to fight. I just wanted the truth to live here, even if I don't." She looked once more at the town, the place that never asked her side of the story, that believed silence over pain. She didn't need its validation. She just needed to leave without its shadow. As she turned to go, an older woman stepped forward, thin, stooped, wearing a shawl knit from memory and regret. "I believe them," the woman said. "I shouldn't have." Hallie nodded once. No forgiveness needed. Some wounds healed better in quiet. She mounted the horse. Tokei H. gave a faint signal, and they turned toward the open road. The wind shifted behind them, kicking up dust that swirled through the legs of the gathering crowd. For miles, they said nothing. The trees thickened as they traveled north, grass brushing against the mare's legs. A river murmured nearby, its sound softer than the voices of men. Hallie broke the silence. "I didn't go back for justice," she said. "I went to bury what they left of me." Tokei H. didn't answer, but his hand moved slightly, just enough to brush hers on the reins. They camped that night near a hollow ring of blackened stones, an old fire pit, long cooled. Hallie sat close to the fresh fire they built. She stared into the embers, her face lined with thought. He passed her a bowl, rabbit stew seasoned with juniper. She sipped slowly, grateful, not just for the food, but for the silence he shared. Not empty silence, the kind that held space. She spoke again, barely above the crackle. "My father used to say, the hardest kindness comes after the worst hurt, like grass growing back after a burn." Toki H. looked into the fire, his jaw tight with memory. Then he reached into his pouch and pulled out something small. A bead, deep red, strung with sinew and shaped like a teardrop. He held it out to her, not as a gift, but as a story. Hallie hesitated, then took it, ran her thumb along its smooth edge. "What does it mean?" He gestured to the sky, to the fire, then to his chest. She understood in her own way. Loss, fire, life continuing. The bead was not an ornament. It was survival shaped in color. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "I don't know if I'll ever feel whole," she said. He met her gaze. You are not pieces. It took her a moment to realize he'd spoken. Soft, accented, but clear. You speak English? He nodded once. No shame in the secret. No pride either. Just truth. Why didn't you before? He stared at her, steady. You needed space to be seen first. Her throat tightened. She looked away before tears could fall. Later, as the stars thickened above them, she lay back on the blanket, staring into that endless dark. He sat near, keeping watch. I didn't think kindness could live in ashes, she whispered. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached toward the fire and pulled a coal away from the center, let it cool in his palm, then placed it gently on a flat stone beside her. The coal glowed, dim but alive. You do, he said. And with that, he lay back beside her, not close, but near enough. They said no more that night. But in the space between sleep and silence, something took root that no fire could burn. By dawn, the fire was out. The stone still held warmth. And so did they. The prairie wind bent low across the tall grass as Hallie and Toki rode side by side into the golden light. The sun rested on the rim of the world, bleeding its last warmth over the hills, casting their long shadows out in front of them like silent omens. She could feel the change in the air, crisp, almost metallic, as if the land itself remembered what had happened and was bracing for her return. They weren't riding blindly. Hallie had a purpose now. Not revenge, not spectacle, just truth. A quiet kind of truth that didn't need shouting to be heard. But to speak it, she would need to face the men who had buried it. The settlement they approached was smaller than the town they'd left behind, but familiar in its way, wooden storefronts weathered by wind, dust curling around the steps of the chapel, and a crooked inn with horses tied out front. It had been a supply post once, where she and her husband would trade for flour and lamp oil, where his brothers played cards and called her girl instead of wife, where his mother bought cloth for a dress she never let Hallie wear. Toki slowed his horse as they neared. Hallie glanced at him, her pulse steady beneath her ribs. He said nothing, but she saw the question in his gaze. Was she ready? She nodded once. The saloon doors creaked as she stepped through them, the sound sharp as a knife in the still air. Inside, the scent of whiskey and smoke curled thick around her. At a table near the window sat 3 men, mid-laugh, cards spread out before them. Her husband's brothers, Jeb and Amos. And across from them, back slouched, cup in hand, was Ethan Redden, her husband. The laughter stopped the moment they saw her. Jeb's face dropped open, the color draining from it like wine from a cracked bottle. Amos swore under his breath and shoved back his chair. Ethan froze, hand still wrapped around the tin cup, as if by holding still he might undo the moment. Hallie stepped into the room fully, her boots loud on the floorboards. She didn't speak yet. Let them squirm. Let silence do its work. Hallie, Ethan said finally, voice dry as burlap. Is that how? She didn't smile. You left me to die. His mouth opened, closed. His fingers clenched around the cup. That ain't Hallie, now wait. No, her voice was calm, cold. You don't get to speak over me. Not this time. The bartender had stopped, wiping his glass. A few men at the bar leaned in, pretending not to listen. Toki stood in the doorway, his presence quiet but undeniable. You told them I ran off, she continued. That I was sick in the head. Couldn't handle life on the prairie. Hallie, it wasn't like that. You stripped my boots, my canteen. You left me with no food, no water, no way back. Amos swore again, louder now. We didn't think you'd make it this far. Jeb elbowed him hard. Shut up. Toki stepped forward. He didn't touch his weapon, didn't speak. But the air around him tensed, taut as a bowstring. Ethan stood, face blotchy, voice trembling. You don't know what it was like, Hallie. You weren't easy. Always crying. Always dragging your feet. Mama said. Your mother said I wasn't worth the flour it took to keep me fed. The room fell still. And you believed her, Hallie said. You all did. Ethan looked away. We thought you'd die, quick. But I didn't, she said. I lived. I crossed the desert. I found kindness where none of you ever offered it. I found a man who gave me water without asking for anything back. Jeb barked a short, humorless laugh. So that's what this is about? You gonna play the poor wounded girl with a new savage at your side? Tokeh's expression didn't change, but he took a step closer. Hallie held out a hand, stopping him. She looked Jeb in the eyes. No, I'm not playing anything. I just want the truth spoken. Here, out loud, so it doesn't rot in the ground like you hoped I would. Ethan's shoulders sagged. He looked smaller than she remembered, younger, or perhaps just more afraid. You'll say nothing and go, he said. You don't belong here anymore. I don't need to belong here, Hallie replied. But you don't get to rewrite what you did. Tokeh placed something on the table between them. A strip of leather, braided, dark with age. Jeb looked down at it. What's that supposed to mean? It's what you tied around the canteen before you took it from her, Tokeh said, his voice low and smooth. Your mark. Hallie watched the color drain from their faces. You left a sign of your cruelty, she said. Even the desert didn't want it. Outside, the wind shifted. The door creaked again, letting in a gust of cold air. Hallie turned without another word, walked out with her head high. They rode away before the sun had fully set, Tokeh silent beside her, the horses' hooves muffled in the dust. The sky turned violet. Stars began to prick through the horizon. She didn't cry. Not yet. There was nothing left in that place to grieve. That night, they made camp by a ridge of stones overlooking a wide valley. The fire was small, but steady. Tokeh cooked without words, as he always did, moving with grace and calm. Hallie sat across from him, turning the old wedding ring over in her hand. I'm not angry, she said softly. I thought I would be, but all I feel is clean, like something was scraped out. He nodded once. I said my piece. That's all I needed. Tokeh reached for a pouch and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. He offered it to her. Inside were beads of many colors, a coil of sinew, and a single hawk feather. She looked up at him. For a new thing, he said. She blinked slowly. A new what? Whatever you choose. She held the feather in her fingers, light as breath. The wind picked up again, brushing across her cheek like a hand. Maybe a new name, she murmured. Or maybe I'll keep Hallie. Let it mean something different now. The stars above them swelled brighter. The valley below lay still. Tokeh didn't press her. He never had. They ate together in silence, the kind that warmed rather than weighed. When she finally lay down, the beadwork clutched in her palm, she realized her heart no longer twisted when she thought of the men who lied. They hadn't broken her. They'd just cleared the way. She closed her eyes beneath the stars, and for the first time, dreamt of beginning instead of endings. The plains shimmered in silver as moonlight fell across the wide, sleeping world. Trees whispered to each other in the dark. Coyotes called from the far hills, their cries long and lonely, answered only by silence and wind. In the hush of night, Hallie stood at the edge of a low bluff, her dress dancing gently around her ankles, hair unbound. The air smelled like sage and pine smoke, like something clean and ancient. Below her, the valley stretched endlessly. No fences, no voices, just earth and sky and the flicker of their fire in the hollow behind her. She hadn't spoken in some time. She didn't need to. The quiet had become a kind of language between her and Tokeh, something deeper than words. His presence behind her was steady, warm, never pressing. He gave her space even when they stood beside each other. Space to breathe, to decide. And yet, tonight felt like a turning. The ache inside her was no longer pain. It had become motion, a stirring of something that asked not to be buried. Not again. She pressed her hand to her heart and felt it answer back, strong and true. She heard him step forward, bare feet brushing dry grass, the soft creak of his belt. He stopped beside her, gaze cast out across the valley. She didn't turn, but she felt him, as sure as she felt the stars waking overhead. There's a fire down there, she said finally. 2 riders. Close enough to smell the smoke if the wind was right. He nodded once. I saw them earlier. Are they looking for someone? Perhaps. The word hung there, fragile and sharp. Hallie's hands tightened slightly. Her past hadn't quite finished with her. She'd known that, after she left the saloon, there were men who didn't like truth spoken plainly, and even fewer who liked their cruelty named. She turned to look at him. "You think they followed us?" His eyes didn't waver. They were paid to. A pause. "For me." He nodded again. The old Hallie would have trembled. The girl who'd stared down at the sand and wondered if her name mattered. The girl who'd once shrunk to fit the rooms of a man's house, thinking quietness made her safer. That Hallie had been buried in the desert, marked by buzzards and sun. This woman, the one standing now, barefoot in the moonlight, a hawk feather braided into her hair, had learned how to survive without bitterness, how to rise without asking permission. She let out a long breath. I suppose it had to come to this. Tokeh looked at her. "We can go. Turn east. Cross the river before dawn." No, her voice was steady. "I don't want to run." A flicker of pride crossed his features, subtle but sure. "Then we wait." They moved quietly down the slope, vanishing into the trees. The firelight from the distant camp flickered between the branches like a warning. Hallie followed Tokeh through the underbrush, careful, light on her feet. He stopped near a boulder, crouching low, signaling her to stay back. She watched as he moved forward, blending with the dark. He was shadow and breath, part of the land itself. A ghost the wind trusted. The voices reached her then, two men speaking in low tones. Rough, nervous. "Sure she came this way. You seen the poster. That's her. That's the girl." "Not a girl. Some wild man's keeping her now." "You really think he's dangerous?" "Doesn't matter. We get her back, we get paid. That's all I care about." Hallie felt something settle in her chest, cold, precise. Not fear. Not anger. Just understanding. They would take her back if they could. Back to silence. To being property. To vanish her story beneath their comfort. She wouldn't allow it. Tokeh returned to her side, eyes unreadable. "They'll sleep soon," he murmured. "We move then." But Hallie didn't want to wait. She'd waited enough in her life. Waited for kindness, for safety, for someone to believe her. She touched his arm. "I'll speak to them." He stared at her, the crease between his brows deepening. "It is not your burden." "No, but it is my voice." He didn't stop her. She walked into the firelight with her shoulders square, her hands open at her sides. The two men scrambled to their feet, startled. One reached for his rifle, the other for his belt. Hallie didn't flinch. "You know my name?" The man with the rifle paused, uncertain. "Hallie Redden? I'm not his wife anymore," she said. "And I'm not property." The second man stepped closer. "Ma'am, we don't want trouble. We're just here to bring you back. Clean it all up. Tell the story proper." She tilted her head. "Whose story?" The men exchanged glances. "The one where I went mad? Ran off? Was rescued by a passing scout? That story." The first man shifted uneasily. "Folks talk. What you been saying, it don't sit right with some people." Hallie stepped closer. Her voice didn't rise, but it gained weight. "It's not meant to sit right. It's meant to sit true." Behind her a shadow appeared. Tokeh, silent and still. One of the men backed up instinctively, hand twitching near his hip. Hallie raised her voice slightly, just enough. "If you lift a weapon, he'll defend me. But he won't strike first. I'm asking you to walk away. Leave this story where it belongs." The man with the rifle scowled. "You think you can just rewrite everything? That people will believe you over them." Hallie's gaze didn't waver. "They don't have to believe. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm just here. Alive." She stepped forward until she stood between them, the fire catching the edge of her dress, the hawk feather glowing faintly in her hair. "You want to take me back? You'll have to drag me across land that saved me, through rivers that remember my name, past the man who found me when I was more ghost than woman. Can you do that?" Neither of them answered. She nodded once. "Then go." Slowly, uncertainly, they lowered their hands, turned, packed their things in awkward silence. The fire cracked once, then fell quiet as they stamped it out. When they rode away, they didn't look back. Hallie stood alone in the clearing, heart thudding not with fear, but release. She turned to Toki H, who watched her as if seeing something he hadn't before. "You didn't need me," he said softly. She smiled. "I needed your quiet, your steadiness. That's not the same as rescue." His eyes warmed. "I know." They walked together back to the bluff, where the stars now blanketed the sky in full. She sat near the fire, curling her knees beneath her. He knelt beside her, unrolling a small pouch. Inside was a strip of hide, blank, waiting. He handed her a carve tool. "Make your own mark," he said. Hallie took it, heart rising into her throat. She thought of what to carve, what word or shape might hold what she'd become. But then she simply began, letting her hand move. A star, a wave, a broken line mended with beads. When she finished, she held it out. "Will you tie it on me?" He did, gently, threading it around her wrist. His fingers paused on her skin, resting there. She looked up at him. "I think I know what home is now." His voice was low. "Tell me, it's not walls, or marriage, or belonging in someone else's story." She reached out and touched his chest. "It's being seen, and safe, and still free." He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to choose. She closed the distance. Their kiss wasn't desperate or sudden. It was quiet, full of knowing, full of nights by the fire and mornings with the scent of river grass. It was a kind of kiss that didn't promise forever, but promised truth. When they pulled apart, the stars above them burned brighter. They laid down beneath that sky, no longer hiding from anything, no longer needing to. And in that hush, where the wind danced gently through the trees, Hallie whispered, "Let them say what they will." Tokeh answered without opening his eyes, "They always will. But now I have a story that lives in me, one they can't erase." He smiled. "Where the stars begin." And somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the dust and the lies, that story carried on. In firelight, in feathers, in footsteps that no longer fled.